With the southern lands dominated by the Horde, the attack on Lordaeron was imminent, sparking the beginning of the Second War. If this is your first time visiting the channel, welcome. My name is Quaylen, and I'm in the middle of abridging the World of Warcraft Chronicle series. That means I'm taking the lore contained within the books and condensing it even more than it already is. I'm not diving into the deep details, just sticking to what's written in the books. Currently, we're on Volume 2, but if you want to start from the beginning, then I suggest clicking the link in the tab up above or in the description down below. That will lead you to a video that contains all 10 episodes containing the lore in Volume 1. But if you're already caught up with the story, then let's continue our journey into the tales of Azeroth. South of Lordaeron, Alexstrasza the Lifebinder and her Red Dragonflight focused their efforts on locating the stolen Dragon Soul, an artifact containing the essence of every dragon aspect except Deathwing. Their search led them to Cosmodan, where they discovered the relic in the possession of an orc named Nekros and his Dragonmaw Clan. Initially underestimating the primitive orcs, the dragons descended upon them with the expectation of an easy victory. However, they were unaware that Deathwing had been secretly influencing Nekros through visions, teaching the orc how to unlock the artifact's true potential, specifically to enslave the Lifebinder and her kin. Utilizing this forbidden knowledge, Nekros unleashed the fury of the Demon Soul, striking Alexstrasza with such excruciating pain that she plummeted from the sky and was subsequently bound in chains by the Dragonmaw. While Nekros lacked the power to control the entire flight simultaneously, he realized that by centering the artifact's torment on the Queen, he could force her followers into submission. The Red Dragons were ultimately coerced into serving the Horde's will, understanding that any attempt to rescue their leader or strike back at the orcs would result in Alexstrasza being lashed with the relic's extraordinary power or even killed. Word of the Dragonmaw Clan's successful capture of Alexstrasza spread throughout the Horde, greatly pleasing War Chief Ogrim Doomhammer, who saw the Red Dragons as a potent new weapon for his arsenal. However, because it would take time to reliably train the dragons for the heat of battle, Doomhammer commanded Nekros Skullcrusher and his clan to occupy Grim Batol. This remote, dilapidated fortress in the mountains east of the wetlands had once belonged to the Wildhammer dwarves, but was abandoned and left haunted by a dark curse placed upon it by the dark iron sorceress Modgud centuries earlier. Once established in the depths of the cursed stronghold, the Dragonmaw orcs chained Alexstrasza and forced her kin to remain with her by threatening to harm the Lifebinder if they disobeyed. Utilizing their experience from Draenor in training winged Rylaks as battle mounts, the orcs began crafting harnesses and saddles to transform the fearsome Red Dragons into tools of war. Throughout this period, Nekros kept constant watch over his captive queen. Though Alexstrasza vowed to destroy him for his actions, her threats remained hollow as long as the orc possessed the power of the Demon Soul. During her long imprisonment, Alexstrasza began laying new clutches of eggs, which Nekros viewed as a golden opportunity to hatch and raise dragon whelps as loyal servants of the Horde. From afar, Deathwing rejoiced in her enslavement and continued to subtly advise Nekros on how to best use the artifact to maintain control. Deathwing's primary goal was to use the Horde to further his own plans for the Black Dragonflight, but he also took personal sadistic pleasure in knowing that seeing her children used as instruments of destruction would break the Lifebinder's heart. As the Horde bolstered its forces, the Alliance under the command of Anduin Lothar sought to do the same by calling upon an ancient pact with the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Centuries earlier, King Thoradin's bloodline, which Lothar carried, had been promised underlying aid from the Elves after their joint victory over the Amani trolls. Despite this oath, King Anastarion's Sunstrider initially dismissed the Orcish threat and sent only a token fleet, leading the skilled ranger, Captain Illyria Windrunner, to defy her king's orders and lead a small group of volunteer rangers south to evaluate the danger firsthand. Lothar welcomed these reinforcements, recognizing their immense value as scouts and archers, even as he faced the disappointing reality of the elves' limited official support. The urgency of the conflict escalated rapidly when scouts reported that the Horde had bypassed the expected land route at the Thandal Span by constructing a massive fleet. This unexpected naval maneuver meant an invasion was imminent and would occur much sooner than Lothar had originally planned. In response, the Supreme Commander ordered the Alliance armies to consolidate at Hillsbrad Foothills, the most probable site for an Orcish landfall. To buy critical time for this mobilization, Lothar called upon Admiral Dalen Proudmoore and the Alliance Navy to intercept and waylay the approaching Orcish vessels at sea. War Chief Orgrim Doomhammer expected the Alliance to eventually discover his fleet, but he remained confident that the Horde could reach southern Lordaeron before a proper defense was mustered. As hundreds of Orcish ships, carrying thousands of soldiers, set sail, they were intercepted near the island of Zoldair by Admiral Dalen Proudmoore and the elite navy of Quel'Thalas. Proudmoore, a master of maritime warfare, utilized his superior vessels to easily outmaneuver the crude Orcish transports. The first Alliance cannon volleys were devastating, sinking dozens of ships and threatening to end the war entirely by destroying the Horde army at sea before they could ever make landfall. The tide of the naval battle turned abruptly with the arrival of the Dragonmaw Clan's aerial support. Although Necro's Skullcrusher had initially protested that the dragons were not yet fully trained for combat, Doomhammer's pressure forced him to dispatch 3 red dragons to guard the fleet under the threat of torturing the captive Alexstrasza. These massive creatures remained at a distance until the Alliance attacked, at which point they descended to bathe Proudmoore's ships in dragonfire. Lacking any effective means to combat such overwhelming aerial power, Admiral Proudmoore was forced to call a full retreat, allowing the scattered remnants of the Horde fleet to continue their invasion. After scattering Admiral Proudmoore's fleet, the Horde made an uncontested landfall at Hillsbrad Foothills, where they found the Alliance defenses in total disarray. Although the Red Dragons had protected the ships, they staged a silent act of defiance by refusing to follow the Orcs inland. Since Necros was still in Grim Batol, he was not present to command them further. Orgrim Doomhammer, unfazed by the lack of aerial support, decided to march his army toward the Alterac Mountains, aiming for the quickest path to strike a capital city and shatter the Alliance from within. Anduin Lothar anticipated Orgrim's strategy and positioned his exhausted troops to block the routes to the capital. Though he struggled to inspire men who were terrified by their first sight of the monstrous orcs, the tide of morale shifted only when the newly trained paladins, including Uther and Terralion, rode through the ranks, replacing the soldiers' fear with holy courage. As the Horde's war drums signaled a massive charge, the two greatest powers in history finally clashed in the first major land engagement of the Second War, supported by Illyria Windrunner's Rangers and the arcane might of Khadgar. The battle took a dark turn when a corrosive fog rolled across the field and the first Death Knights appeared, led by hooded figures on skeletal steeds. These unholy warriors resurrected fallen humans to fight their own comrades, causing the Alliance lines to crumble under the sheer horror of the display. Orgrim watched the carnage with a mix of unease and tactical satisfaction, realizing that while he distrusted these undead soldiers, their ability to inflict terror was an unparalleled asset on the battlefield. However, the paladins quickly countered this dark magic by unleashing waves of holy energy that cleared the corruptive mists and destroyed the reanimated corpses. This display of the light not only neutralized the Death Knight's primary advantage, but also mended the wounds of the Alliance soldiers, allowing them to regroup and strike back at the Orcish front lines with renewed ferocity. The battle in Hillsbrad became a stalemate, with both sides evenly matched in a brutal struggle for dominance. Recognizing that a prolonged fight in Hillsbrad favored the Alliance's ability to bring in reinforcements, Doomhammer realized he could not break through the guarded routes to Lordaeron directly. He decided to pivot his strategy and move east to find an alternative path to the capital, seeking the assistance of the Amani trolls who knew the mountainous terrain intimately. The trolls agreed to serve as guides, but only on the condition that Doomhammer first fulfill his promise to help them liberate their legendary leader, Zul'jin. Before we continue, I'd like to mention that if you're enjoying this content, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, if you feel inclined to support the work that I'm doing, you can check out my membership options here on YouTube or on Patreon. I'm really grateful for all of those who have supported this massive project that I've been working on for quite some time now, and I do offer early access to all those people who have signed up. So if you're interested, check out the links down below, and let's get back to the story. Orgrim Doomhammer remained committed to his vow to liberate Warlord Zul'jin, leading a specialized raiding party to a prison camp near Durnhold Keep, while the broader battles in Hillsbrad raged. The rescue was swift and successful, but Zul'jin initially hesitated to join the Horde, fiercely protective of his autonomy as the leader of the Amani. To secure the alliance, Doomhammer promised Zul'jin that the trolls would be treated as equals rather than servants, and he offered the ultimate incentive. The Horde would assist the Amani in the total annihilation of their ancient rivals, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas. Though attacking Quel'Thalas required a detour further north than originally planned, Doomhammer viewed the Amani's support as a military necessity to counter the Alliance's powerful new paladins. He commanded Varrock Saurfang and a rearguard of Blackrock Orcs to delay Lothar's forces, allowing the main body of the Horde to slip through a narrow mountain pass into the hinterlands. Guided by the trolls, the Orcs moved rapidly through the rugged terrain toward the Elven borders, but their progress was soon interrupted by the arrival of Wildhammer Dwarf Griffin Riders, who struck from the sky with devastating lightning and thunder. The hinterlands had long been the domain of the Wildhammer Dwarves, a tenacious and independent people who ruled from their mountain stronghold, Airy Peak. Renowned for their deep kinship with griffins, the Wildhammers featured many adept shaman who infused their signature stormhammers with the power of lightning. Because of their isolationist nature, they remained entirely unaware of the Horde's existence or the ongoing conflict in Hillsbrad until the Orcish army marched directly into their territory. In response to the intrusion, Thane Curdran led his Griffin Riders in a series of hit-and-run aerial bombardments, using stormhammers to whittle away at the Horde's strength while retreating into the safety of the clouds. With the Horde's red dragons still stationed in Hillsbrad guarding ships, Orgrim Doomhammer lacked an immediate aerial counter and realized he could not continue his march north under constant harassment. To bypass the dwarves, the war chief launched a diversionary assault on Airy Peak, which forced Curdran to consolidate his forces for a capital defense. While half of the Orcish army kept the dwarves pinned down in a brutal siege, Orgrim and the remaining half of the Horde successfully slipped away to the north. Curdran's forces, focused entirely on the survival of their home, did not pursue the retreating contingent, allowing the war chief to move toward his next objective undetected. The situation changed when Anduin Lothar and the Alliance army arrived in the hinterlands to reinforce the dwarves, eventually driving the orcs into the forests. Following the battle, Curdran pledged the Wildhammer clan to the Alliance, providing Lothar with a crucial aerial asset to eventually rival the Horde's dragons. From Curdran, Lothar learned he had been outmaneuvered and that Orgrim's main force was already heading north, prompting him to dispatch Turalyon to track them down. Despite this setback, Lothar felt the eastern passes to Lordaeron were secure, trusting King Perinold of Alterac to hold the mountain barricades against any further Orcish advances. Throughout the Second War, Garona was kept under constant surveillance of the Blackrock warrior Eitrig, serving the Horde as both a translator and a soldier. Initially, Garona dismissed her handler as a mindless fanatic loyal to the legacy of the tyrant Blackhand, but she eventually detected a lingering sense of honor within him. Attempting to win his trust, she shared the harrowing truth about Gul'dan, the Shadow Council, and the burning reality that the orcs were merely puppets of a demonic force destined to turn Azeroth into a wasteland. However, Eitrig initially rejected her revelations as poisonous lies, unable to reconcile her words with her history as the dishonorable assassin of the Shadow Council. Following Eitrig's harsh rebuke, Garona ceased her attempts to convince him and waited for a moment to strike out on her own. This opportunity surfaced amidst the chaos of the military campaign in the hinterlands, where she managed to slip into the dense forests and vanish from Orcish custody. Although Eitrig realized she had fled, he chose not to pursue her, prioritizing the war against the Alliance over a single prisoner. Ultimately, a hidden sense of sympathy played a role in his decision, recognizing that Garona was a product of Gul'dan's cruelty rather than a killer by choice. He allowed her to go in the hope that she might finally find a true home on Azeroth. While the Alliance was occupied in the hinterlands, Ogrim Doomhammer led half of the Horde toward Quel'Thalas without opposition. During the journey, Warlord Zul'jin successfully rallied thousands of Amani trolls from their capital, Zul-Aman, by promising the destruction of their ancient elven enemies. This massive combined force of orcs and magically adorned trolls quickly arrived at the borders of Quel'Thalas, easily decimating the High Elves' outer holdings and threatening the heart of the kingdom. The Horde's momentum faced a challenge when Gul'dan realized that the Amani witch doctors and death knights were being weakened by a magical barrier called Bandinorial, or the Gatekeeper. This ancient shield was powered by monolithic runestones that masked the elves' magic and actively dampened the abilities of their enemies. Gul'dan proposed dismantling a runestone to shatter the barrier and use its components to empower the Horde's forces, a plan Doomhammer cautiously approved despite his lingering distrust of the warlock. Beknownst to Doomhammer, Gul'dan had already subverted the war chief's spies through threats and bribes, and he was secretly planning to abandon the Horde entirely. To ensure he had enough power to reach the Tomb of Sargeras and defend himself against Orgrim's eventual retaliation, Gul'dan needed the energy from the Elven relics. He was backed by the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans, but he sought a more formidable force of loyalists to secure his survival during his upcoming desertion. Using pieces of the dismantled runestone, Gul'dan and the ogre mage Cho'Gall constructed the Altars of Storms. They utilized an ancient Highmaul ritual to channel raw arcane energy into selected ogres, transforming them into intelligent, two-headed ogre magi. These new casters were exceptionally powerful and, crucially, held a secret loyalty to Gul'dan rather than the war chief, providing the warlock with the specialized army he required for his secret mission. As the siege of Quel'Thalas loomed, Gul'dan continued to gather intelligence on powerful artifacts he had discovered through the memories of the deceased Medivh. Although he did not have the chance to claim these relics himself, he shared their secrets with the Death Knights to further his influence. With his new Ogre Magi ready and his plans for betrayal nearly finalized, the warlock simply waited for the perfect moment to strike out on his own and seek the ultimate power hidden within the Tomb of Sargeras. The desecration of the runestone restored the magic of the Horde's spellcasters, allowing Ogrim's forces to launch a devastating campaign towards Silvermoon City. The orcs and Amani trolls pillaged the countryside, causing a level of elven casualties not seen since the ancient troll wars. This brutality prompted King Anastarian to officially pledge the full support of Quel'Thalas to the Alliance. This unification was solidified as Turalian and Illyria Windrunner arrived with reinforcements, with the High Elves and humans once again standing together to prevent the total oblivion of their kingdoms. Despite this new alliance, the tide of battle shifted dramatically with the arrival of the Dragonmaw Clan's Red Dragons, which had finally been trained as battle mounts. The Griffin Riders were forced to retreat in the face of these superior aerial predators, and the dragons, many weeping as they were forced to act against their nature, incinerated the forests and Alliance ranks alike. The resulting firestorm forced the Elven defenders to retreat behind the walls of Silvermoon City, where sorcerers summoned a massive, impenetrable shield powered by the Sunwell to protect the capital from both the Orcish ground forces and the dragon's mystical fire. Faced with the unbreakable barrier of the Sunwell, Orgrim Doomhammer decided to pivot his strategy, as his primary goal remained the conquest of Lordaeron's capital rather than a prolonged siege of the elves. He felt he had fulfilled enough of his pact with the Amani by dealing Quel'Thalas a blow that would take centuries to repair, while also successfully integrating the new Ogre Magi and Red Dragons into his active military. With these powerful new assets at his command, Ogrim began seeking a surprise route that would allow the Horde to bypass the Alliance's main strength and strike directly at the heart of Lordaeron. After failing to breach Silvermoon City, Orgrim Doomhammer decided to pivot his forces west toward Lordaeron's capital. To maintain the element of surprise, he planned to bypass the heavily fortified roads and valleys between the two kingdoms, opting instead to lead his massive army through the rugged and treacherous Alterac Mountains. This tactical shift was designed to strike at the heart of the Alliance before they could consolidate their scattered defenses. However, this plan caused a major rift with Warlord Zul'jin and the Amani trolls, who refused to abandon their siege of the High Elves. Zul'jin's singular obsession with decapitating King Anastarian and seeing Quel'Thalas burn threatened to deprive the Horde of their essential mountain guides. Fearing the loss of these allies at such a pivotal moment, Doomhammer was forced to navigate the stubbornness of the trolls while maintaining the momentum of his primary campaign. Gul'dan seized this moment of tension to advance his own secret agenda of desertion. He convinced both Ogrim and Zul'jin that the Stormreaver clan had discovered a way to dismantle the Sunwell's barrier within a few days. Doomhammer cautiously agreed to leave the Warlock and his clan behind to assist the trolls, but he remained deeply suspicious. He ordered the Dragonmaw Clan to remain in Quel'Thalas to oversee Gul'dan, giving them express permission to execute him if he failed to march west after the 3-day deadline. As the main Horde force entered the mountains, they were met by King Perinold of Alterac, who had decided to betray the Alliance out of pure cowardice. Paralyzed by fear of the Horde's Death Knights and dragons, Perinold offered Ogrim safe passage through Alterac's secret, unguarded mountain passes in exchange for the safety of his kingdom. This betrayal allowed the Orcish army to circumvent the Alliance's defensive positions entirely, saving them weeks of difficult travel and ensuring they remained undetected. Fortune appeared to favor the war chief as his army emerged from the mountain passes and descended into the Tirisfal glades. Without allowing his soldiers a moment of rest, Ogrim launched a full-scale assault on the walls of Capital City, catching the human leadership off guard. With the Alliance forces still divided between the hinterlands and the distant forests of Quel'Thalas, the fall of the human seat of power seemed imminent as the Second War reached its most critical boiling point. Turalyon and his allies had long anticipated a Horde strike on Lordaeron's capital, but the situation became dire when Orgrim Doomhammer suddenly withdrew the bulk of his forces from Quel'Thalas. While Turalyon raced west with half of the Alliance army, he initially believed the rugged Alterac Mountains would provide enough of a natural barrier to delay the orcs. However, the devastating news of King Perinold's betrayal changed everything. By granting the Horde safe passage through his kingdom's barricades, the King of Alterac allowed the Orcish army to reach the capital in days rather than months, bypassing the Alliance's planned defenses. Lordaeron's capital city faced a brutal bombardment from Horde catapults, yet it remained resilient under the inspired leadership of King Terenas Menethil. Though not a warrior by trade, Terenas displayed immense courage by taking his place on the ramparts and organizing the defense himself, vowing to die before letting the city fall. His presence galvanized the citizenry, turning the siege into a desperate battle for the very survival of humanity. Orgrim admired the humans' tenacity, but he remained confident that the city would eventually crumble once his expected reinforcements arrived from the east. As the siege dragged on, Orgrim's confidence began to waver due to the unexplained absence of the Dragonmaw, Stormreaver, and Twilight's Hammer clans. The arrival of Turalyon's army from the east further complicated the war chief's plans, providing the exhausted city defenders with a brief respite and signaling that the rest of the Alliance's combined might was closing in. Orgrim realized that to secure victory, he needed his full strength immediately, but he had received no word from his lieutenants in Quel'Thalas, leading to a mounting sense of unease that something had gone terribly wrong within the Horde's hierarchy. The breaking point arrived when the Dragonmaw riders reached the capital with the catastrophic news that Gul'dan had betrayed the Horde, taking the Stormreaver and Twilight's Hammer clans to seize the fleet at Hillsbrad. Simultaneously, Orgrim learned that the Alliance had discovered Perinold's treachery and successfully resealed the mountain passes, effectively cutting off any hope of reinforcements from the hinterlands. Doomhammer realized in this moment that the war was effectively lost. Even a successful capture of the capital would be a hollow victory, as his diminished and divided forces would never hold the city against the approaching Alliance tide. Consumed by a righteous fury over being robbed of total victory, Orgrim Doomhammer called off the siege and ordered a full-scale retreat toward the safety of Cosmodan. To cover the withdrawal, he deployed his dragon riders to harass the pursuing Alliance forces while sending the Blacktooth Grin clan on a mission of vengeance to hunt down and execute Gul'dan. Though the war chief hoped to regroup and rebuild his campaign from the south, he knew the Horde now faced the very real prospect of total annihilation thanks to the warlock's ultimate act of selfishness. As the Second War raged on, Gul'dan made his way to the Tomb of Sargeras in search for ultimate power. However, what he found was not what he expected. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like this kind of content, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing, please check out my YouTube, Patreon, or Twitch memberships. And a big shout out to all the names on the screen here. You mean so much to me. Thank you so much for your help. And with that, I'll see you guys next time on the Tales of Azeroth.